Late at night, the sea becomes honest, in a way daylight never allows, revealing shape without promise, memory without explanation, and calm without permission. It does not perform for curiosity, and it does not reward attention with answers, preferring instead to remain steady long after interest fades. This is where tonight's story begins, not with discovery, but with restraint and with stone that never agreed to explain itself. Before you drift any deeper, if this quiet helps you feel safe tonight, you're welcome to stay with us. Subscribing softly keeps this place gentle and lets these nights continue. Now, rest. After that invitation, the ocean resumes its old habit of indifference, holding pressure and depth without commentary, as if human curiosity were simply another current passing by. Off the coast of a small island at the edge of Japan, something remains underwater that never attempted to be impressive and never prepared for witnesses. It did not rise to greet history, and it did not fall in catastrophe because neither movement suited its temperament. It stayed submerged, where explanation slows down, certainty softens, and time feels less urgent than opinion. Yonaguni does not behave like a legend because legends ask to be believed, and this formation never asked for belief. It behaves like stone that has been left alone long enough for humans to argue politely over its intentions while the sea continues working without concern. In this quiet version of history, nothing rushes forward and nothing waits behind a curtain for applause or shock. There is no revelation preparing to step into light, only layered rock fractured by pressure, shaped by time, and tolerated by water. The humor here is dry and unannounced, found in how quickly we invent drama when patience would have explained everything slowly. This is not a story about lost cities, hidden engineers, or vanished certainty, but about the discomfort that appears when stone refuses to choose a category. Nature is expected to curve and crumble, while humans are expected to design and abandon, and Yonaguni quietly disrupts both expectations. It looks deliberate enough to provoke thought and ordinary enough to resist myth, leaving interpretation suspended between confidence and restraint. In late-night history, that suspension is allowed to remain because rest does not require resolution and calm does not depend on answers. The sea holds its shape, stone holds its silence, and that is enough. The day the seabed looked too ordered. In 1986, the seabed near Yonaguni did not change its behavior, but a diver did. While searching for hammerhead sharks in familiar water, a local diver noticed that the ground beneath him had begun to feel strangely disciplined. The seafloor usually improvises. It curves, collapses, scatters, and softens. This did not. Large flat surfaces appeared where slopes were expected. Edges ran straight for distances that felt excessive. Corners met at angles that did not wobble or dissolve into suggestion. Nothing announced importance. The water did not glow. The stone did not shift. Significance arrived quietly as irritation. Something here was interfering with expectation. At first it was easy to dismiss. Underwater visibility plays tricks. Light bends, distance lies. Familiar shapes rearrange themselves when seen through pressure and movement. The ocean is generous with illusions. A single dive proves nothing. The diver surfaced, adjusted memory, returned another day. The surfaces were still there. The plains remained level, the edges still refused to curve. The seafloor behaved as though it had been measured, not deposited. This was not drama, it was repetition. Repetition is where unease begins. Each dive revealed more of the same behavior. Steps appeared, not decorative, not ornamental, but sized like steps meant to be used. Terraces unfolded in sequence, not randomly stacked, but layered as though they expected traffic. Vertical faces dropped cleanly, not fractured or jagged, but sharp enough to suggest intention without confirming it. The structure did not resemble a ruin. It resembled infrastructure interrupted by water rather than destroyed by it. The ocean had not rearranged it. It had simply arrived later. What unsettled observers was not beauty, but discipline. Coral behaves generously. It accepts curves. It softens mistakes. Geological formations tend toward chaos over time. Yonaguni resisted that drift. It did not sprawl. It held alignment. The more it was observed, the less accidental it appeared. Yet the more it was studied, the harder it became to assign it confidently to human hands. This tension is where the site settled, neither clearly built nor convincingly natural, occupying a narrow space that made certainty uncomfortable. Divers reported the same feeling repeatedly. The formation did not invite awe, it invited pacing. Movement slowed instinctively, as if the geometry required respect. One did not drift aimlessly over it. One followed lines, corners suggested turns, platforms suggested pauses. The body responded before the mind could argue. This is not how reefs behave. Reefs do not organize attention. Yonaguni did. The stone itself offered no decoration. There were no carvings, no inscriptions, no symbols pleading for interpretation. The surfaces were plain, almost rude in their refusal to entertain. This absence of ornament complicated the story. Human construction usually leaves fingerprints. Yonaguni left none that were obvious. What remained was shape without signature, structure without authorship. That silence became part of the problem. Geologists arrived with caution rather than excitement. Sandstone can fracture along straight plains. Tectonic stress can produce terraces. Earthquakes carve steps without consulting architects. Nature is capable of surprising neatness under specific conditions. These explanations were not dismissive. They were reasonable. The difficulty was that none of them felt complete on their own. Each accounted for part of the formation, not the whole. Yonaguni did not collapse into a single explanation easily. It resisted efficiency. Archaeologists were more restrained. There were no artifacts, no tools, no pottery, no debris fields suggesting occupation. Without these, claims of human origin stalled quickly. Architecture rarely exists in isolation. People leave mess. Yonaguni was clean, too clean for habitation. This absence pushed interpretation back toward geology, but not with relief. The formation still behaved as though it had been organized. Cleanliness in this context was not reassuring. The humor here is subtle and uncomfortable. Humans are skilled at identifying patterns, especially when patterns refuse to explain themselves. When faced with ambiguity, imagination fills gaps eagerly. Yonaguni attracted theories quickly, lost civilizations, sunken continents, forgotten engineers. Each theory said more about modern longing than ancient reality. The formation itself remained unimpressed by these projections, continuing to sit quietly beneath currents that did not care. What made the site persist in conversation was not belief but irritation. It interrupted the smooth flow of classification. Scientists prefer clear categories. This was neither reef nor ruin in a way that felt satisfying. The seabed looked too ordered to ignore and too empty to claim. That contradiction kept attention returning. Each return produced the same result. The stone did not change. Opinions did. Repeated dives mapped the structure more thoroughly. Measurements confirmed consistency. Angles repeated. Steps aligned. Terraces followed, predictable spacing. Nothing here screamed intelligence, but nothing here felt lazy. The formation appeared to have been shaped patiently, whether by stress, water, or hands. Patience leaves different marks than force. Yonaguni bore the marks of patience. The sea itself seemed complicit in the confusion. Currents flowed around edges cleanly as though accustomed to their presence. Sediment gathered in corners that felt designed to hold it. Erosion had softened surfaces without destroying form. This suggested age without collapse. The structure had not fought the ocean, it had coexisted with it. That coexistence felt deliberate, whether or not intention was involved. In late-night history, this is where the tone settles. No announcement follows, no conclusion arrives. The day the seabed looked too ordered was not a turning point. It was a pause, a moment when certainty loosened its grip slightly. The ocean did not explain itself. The stone did not clarify. Humans did what they always do in such moments. They kept returning, hoping repetition would choose a side. Yonaguni did not. It remained patient. It allowed measurement, debate, dismissal, revival. It accepted labels briefly and then shed them. It did not rise to defend itself as human-made, nor did it collapse comfortably into natural explanation. It stayed underwater, where confidence moves slowly and pressure discourages drama. What was found in 1986 was not a city, a monument, or a mistake. It was an interruption, a reminder that sometimes stone arranges itself in ways that feel intentional enough to unsettle and ordinary enough to deny romance. The seabed did not look miraculous. It looked inconveniently ordered, and that, more than anything, ensured it would not be forgotten quickly. The discovery did not demand belief. It demanded attention without resolution. In that demand, it fit comfortably into the long tradition of places that refuse to clarify themselves. Yonaguni did not change history. It changed posture. It asked observers to stand differently with uncertainty, to accept that some shapes remain suspended between explanation and patience. The sea closed over it again, as it always had, indifferent to the questions forming above. A shape that refused to choose a side. From above, the formation near Yonaguni does not attempt subtlety. It appears large, layered, and insistently geometric. Wide platforms descend in sequence, not gently, but decisively. Long straight lines run farther than comfort usually allows underwater. Sharp edges intersect at angles that feel maintained rather than accidental. And yet nothing here declares itself built. Nothing announces intention. The structure presents shape without allegiance, and that refusal is where the unease quietly settles. Seen from a distance, the monument-like mass feels architectural. Seen closer, it behaves like stone that has followed its own rules for a very long time. Some surfaces appear carved, smooth enough to suggest repeated contact or deliberate shaping. Others look fractured, irregular, and resistant to narrative. The coexistence of these traits disrupts expectation. Human construction tends toward consistency. Geological formations tend toward variation. Yonaguni offers both without apology. This ambiguity is not dramatic. It is persistent. Divers do not report a moment of revelation. They report a slow accumulation of irritation. The formation never resolves into a single explanation, no matter how long one stays with it. It does not improve with familiarity. In fact, the longer it is observed, the more carefully it avoids commitment. Yonaguni behaves like something that has been misunderstood equally by enthusiasm and skepticism. Nature usually curves when given time. Water erodes edges, wind rounds corners, gravity collapses excess. Given enough patience, the natural world prefers softness. This preference is reliable enough that humans learn to expect it. Yonaguni resists that expectation without fully denying it. Some edges are softened, some corners are worn, but the overall geometry persists. The platforms remain level, the angles remain stubborn. Time appears to have negotiated rather than dominated. Human architecture, by contrast, tends to leave traces beyond shape. Tools break, materials accumulate, refuse gathers. Even the most carefully abandoned site carries evidence of occupation. Yonaguni carries none of this. There are no shards, no fragments, no scatter, suggesting human presence beyond the stone itself. This absence undermines claims of construction without offering relief. Cleanliness here is not comforting. It removes one certainty without replacing it. The result is a structure that refuses allegiance. It does not fully belong to geology or archaeology. Each discipline approaches it with confidence that slowly thins. Geological explanations account for straight fractures, tectonic uplift, and sandstone layering. Archaeological instincts respond to steps, terraces, and scale that feels impractical for nature alone. Neither perspective collapses the site into clarity. Yonaguni remains inconvenient. This inconvenience has a particular texture. It is not fear, it is not awe. It is the discomfort of something that behaves correctly according to more than one logic at the same time. The human mind prefers exclusivity, built or natural, intentional or accidental. Yonaguni refuses these binaries gently, without argument. It simply stays. There is light, dry humor, in how seriously humans take this refusal. Entire careers have leaned forward over these stones, hoping that proximity would force confession. Yonaguni remains silent, not out of mystery, but out of indifference. It does not respond to debate. It does not reward allegiance. The structure continues to exist underwater where categories move more slowly, and certainty costs more effort. When divers swim along the terraces, their bodies respond instinctively. Movement aligns with the steps. Turns occur where corners suggest them. This bodily response is difficult to dismiss. Architecture is often defined not by how it looks, but by how it directs motion. Yonaguni directs motion without signage, without instruction. This guidance feels subtle, almost reluctant, as though the stone itself is unsure whether it should take responsibility for the behavior it encourages. At the same time, the formation lacks features that usually confirm human design. There are no doorways sized for bodies, no niches that clearly signal use, no symmetry that insists on planning. The scale is simultaneously too large and too empty. If it were a city, it would be inconveniently exposed. If it were a monument, it would be strangely unfinished. These mismatches frustrate both imagination and restraint. Geological processes are capable of producing straight lines under specific conditions. Layered sandstone can fracture cleanly. Tectonic stress can create steps. Submersion can preserve shape longer than exposure. These explanations are not weak. They are grounded. The difficulty lies in their accumulation. Each explanation accounts for part of Yonaguni, not its total behavior. The formation feels over-explained and under-explained at the same time. Archaeological enthusiasm often falters here. Without artifacts, claims of civilization struggle to stand. Archaeology depends on context as much as structure. Yonaguni offers structure without context. It is a sentence without surrounding paragraphs. This absence invites speculation but does not support it. The formation does not behave like a ruin waiting to be decoded. It behaves like stone that never agreed to be a message. The patience of the site is perhaps its most unsettling quality. Yonaguni does not deteriorate quickly. It does not crumble into abstraction. It erodes slowly, evenly, as though cooperating with water rather than resisting it. This cooperation suggests age without fragility. Whatever shaped this formation, whether stress or hands, did so in a way that anticipated water rather than denying it. The structure appears comfortable underwater, which complicates narratives of submersion or disaster. If this were a drowned city, it does not mourn its loss. There is no collapse suggesting sudden abandonment, no drama etched into stone. The terraces do not slope in panic. The edges do not fracture chaotically. Everything feels composed even now. That composure is difficult to reconcile with catastrophe. At the same time, it does not celebrate natural chaos either. It remains disciplined. In late-night history, this discipline is allowed to exist without conclusion. The story does not require resolution to remain engaging. Yonaguni teaches a quieter lesson. Some things are unsettling not because they hide answers, but because they do not need them. The formation does not ask to be solved. It asks to be observed without urgency. There is a tendency to inflate ambiguity into mystery. Yonaguni resists this inflation. It does not behave like a secret. It behaves like an object that has already accepted whatever it is. The discomfort arises not from the stone, but from the observer's need for alignment. Humans prefer sides. Yonaguni refuses to choose one. This refusal exposes a habit. When faced with uncertainty, humans rush to decorate it. Lost civilizations appear quickly. Forgotten engineers are imagined generously. These stories fill silence efficiently. Yonaguni remains unimpressed by these efforts. It does not validate them with evidence. It does not collapse under scrutiny. It simply remains what it is, which is enough to keep debate alive without nourishing it. The formation also challenges assumptions about intention. Intention is often treated as visible. If something looks deliberate, we assume a mind behind it. Yonaguni suggests another possibility. Order can emerge from pressure, repetition, and time without narrative. The result may look intentional without being planned. This idea unsettles because it removes humans from the center of meaning. Standing metaphorically above Yonaguni, one feels this removal. The formation does not mirror human ambition. It does not scale itself to comfort. It does not provide orientation beyond what its geometry implies. It is neither hostile nor welcoming. It simply exists, layered and patient, underwater where certainty diffuses. This diffusion is important. Water softens confidence, light bends, sound disappears, movement slows. Underwater environments discourage sharp conclusions. Yonaguni belongs to this environment naturally. It thrives where explanations lose speed. That may be why it continues to unsettle. It exists in a medium that resists haste. From above, the shape remains massive. From within, it feels navigable. From a distance, it suggests architecture. From close proximity, it feels geological. These contradictions do not cancel each other out. They coexist. Yonaguni is not confused. It is simply uninterested in resolution. In a calmer telling, this is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be acknowledged. Some shapes refuse allegiance. Some stones do not choose sides. Yonaguni remains suspended between explanations, not because it is hiding truth, but because truth here does not simplify. The humor, if it exists, is gentle. Humans argue passionately. Stone remains quiet. Careers advance. The formation waits. The ocean continues to move above it without commentary. Yonaguni has no preference for outcome. It does not benefit from belief or disbelief. It endures either way. As the night deepens, this endurance becomes easier to accept. Not everything needs to resolve. Not every shape must confess its origin. Yonaguni offers a rare comfort. It demonstrates that ambiguity can persist without crisis, that patience can outlast certainty, that stone can refuse to choose a side and still remain complete. The shape remains, the sides remain unchosen. And in that quiet refusal, the mind is invited to rest rather than decide. Geology that does not apologize. Yonaguni does not begin with mystery. It begins with stone. Layered sandstone and mudstone sit beneath the water, arranged in horizontal bands that were formed long before any human expectation learned to ask questions. These layers are ordinary for the region. They are not rare. They are not exotic. They belong to the same geological story that shaped nearby cliffs, coastlines, and reefs. In daylight and textbooks, this explanation feels sufficient. At night, when the sea quiets and observation slows, sufficiency becomes less convincing. Sandstone fractures along plains because it is made that way. Pressure compresses layers unevenly. Tectonic movement encourages straight breaks rather than curves. Earthquakes do not carve delicately. They release stress abruptly. In regions like Yonaguni, seismic activity is not a dramatic interruption. It is background behavior. The ground shifts, stone adjusts. Fractures propagate along lines of weakness that already exist. This process does not require intention. It requires time and repetition. Water then arrives to continue the work. Erosion does not act with preference. It smooths surfaces exposed to current. It polishes edges that receive constant contact. It leaves other edges sharp when flow patterns bypass them. This selective smoothing often confuses observers who expect uniform softness from age. Age does not guarantee roundness. It guarantees interaction. Where water touches repeatedly, change occurs. Where it does not, stone remains stubborn. Geology explains much of Yonaguni without embarrassment. Straight edges are not illegal in nature. Terraces can emerge through differential erosion. Steps can form when harder layers resist, where longer than softer ones below. Right angles are less common, but not forbidden. Under specific conditions, fracture patterns align in ways that resemble planning. Nature does not avoid geometry. It simply does not advertise it. This is where discomfort enters gently. Geological explanations account for many individual features, but struggle with their accumulation. One straight edge is unremarkable. 10 aligned edges invite attention. One level platform is plausible. Multiple stacked platforms create hesitation. The mind begins to tally probabilities. Each feature remains defensible. The total begins to feel excessive. Yonaguni does not deny its geological origin. It does not attempt to disguise the rock layers that reveal its history. Grain direction is visible. Bedding planes can be traced. Mineral composition matches surrounding formations. There is no foreign material introduced. Nothing interrupts the continuity of stone. This transparency argues strongly for natural formation. And yet, transparency does not produce comfort. The unease does not come from contradiction. It comes from precision. Geological processes are powerful but indifferent. They do not aim for symmetry. They do not stop at convenient boundaries. Yonaguni appears restrained. Edges terminate cleanly. Platforms hold consistent width. Drop-offs occur with a regularity that feels managed. These impressions do not overthrow geology. They complicate it. Some researchers emphasize jointing patterns common in sandstone. Vertical joints intersect horizontal bedding, producing block-like forms. When uplifted and submerged, these blocks can resemble architecture. This explanation is reasonable. It appears in other locations. What distinguishes Yonaguni is scale and preservation. The formation is not a scatter of blocks. It is cohesive. It reads as a single object rather than debris. Earthquakes contribute further complexity. Repeated seismic events can step landscapes incrementally. A fault line lifts one section while leaving another intact. Over time, stair-like formations emerge. These are not sculpted deliberately. They are consequences of stress release. Yonaguni sits in a region where this behavior is expected. Expectation, however, does not eliminate surprise. Water erosion should soften such features eventually. Over long periods, sharp edges usually retreat. Corners dissolve. Yonaguni resists this trend unevenly. Some edges are softened. Others remain assertive. This inconsistency fuels argument. Geologists point to variable exposure. Currents shift. Sediment protects some surfaces while others erode. This explanation works. It simply does not soothe. In late-night history, geology does not apologize for ambiguity. It does not rush to reassure. It acknowledges complexity without resolving it neatly. Yonaguni behaves like a lesson in restraint. The stone offers evidence, but withholds comfort. It allows explanation without closure. There is subtle irony in how humans react to this. When nature produces chaos, it is accepted easily. When it produces order, suspicion follows. Order is treated as a human trait. Yonaguni challenges that bias quietly. It suggests that order can emerge without intent and that this possibility unsettles because it reduces the need for authorship. The formation also exposes a preference in interpretation. People are more comfortable attributing unexplained order to lost builders than to patient geology. Builders imply narrative. Geology implies time without story. Time without story feels empty to modern minds, trained on progress and achievement. Yonaguni offers time without narration. Scientific caution often feels unsatisfying here. Phrases like likely, consistent with, and plausible accumulate without climax. There is no decisive statement, no final diagram. This frustrates audiences who expect science to deliver certainty. In reality, science delivers boundaries. Yonaguni sits within those boundaries without settling at the center. Some observers mistake this for weakness. It is not, it is accuracy. Geological processes are complex, layered, and often incomplete in record. Underwater environments obscure evidence. Erosion removes context as effectively as it shapes form. Yonaguni has been underwater long enough to lose information without losing structure. This asymmetry complicates interpretation. The stone itself does not protest debate. It does not shift in response to theory. It remains layered, fractured, and submerged. It does not apologize for appearing intentional. It does not clarify its origin to relieve discomfort. It simply exists within the rules that shaped it. This refusal to apologize is important. Yonaguni does not seek permission to look unusual. It does not correct assumptions. It allows humans to project expectations and then confront their limits. In this way, geology becomes unsettling, not because it hides truth, but because it reveals how much order it can produce without instruction. Late at night, this realization softens rather than alarms. The need to decide recedes. The formation does not require belief. It requires patience. Stone behaves according to pressure, time, and material properties. Yonaguni demonstrates this behavior openly, even when the result feels inconvenient. The humor, faint but present, lies in the imbalance of effort. Humans debate passionately. Stone remains indifferent. Papers are written. The formation waits. Decades pass. The shape persists without revision. Geology is not offended by doubt. It does not rush to convince. Yonaguni therefore becomes less a puzzle and more a mirror. It reflects discomfort with explanations that do not perform conclusively. It exposes a desire for narrative where none is required. The stone does not need to choose a side. It is content to be what it is. In the calm register of late-night history, this contentment is enough. The layers remain visible. The fractures remain honest. The erosion continues slowly. Nothing accelerates, nothing resolves. Yonaguni does not apologize for ambiguity. It demonstrates that ambiguity can be a stable condition. As the night deepens, geology becomes easier to accept without summary. The stone holds, the sea moves above it. Pressure continues quietly. The formation remains layered, fractured, and patient. Explanation exists, but not conclusion. This is geology without apology. It does not ask to be trusted. It does not demand belief. It simply continues, confident that time will not require it to explain itself further. In this quiet, even disagreement settles into a slower rhythm. Arguments lose their urgency when nothing at the center responds. Yonaguni does not reward certainty, but it also does not punish curiosity. It allows competing explanations to exist without collapse. Geology remains the foundation, sufficient, even when it feels incomplete to those accustomed to closure. The formation demonstrates that explanation does not have to be total to be valid. Partial understanding can coexist with stability. This coexistence is difficult for modern thought, which often equates knowledge with dominance. To understand something fully is assumed to grant control. Yonaguni offers a counterexample. It can be understood adequately without becoming manageable, summarized, or owned. The stone does not change behavior when studied. It does not improve with attention. It does not deteriorate because of disagreement. It simply persists, shaped by forces that operate on scales larger than preference. Late-night history finds comfort here. There is relief in recognizing that not every formation requires a verdict. Some things exist well enough without resolution. Yonaguni does not need to be claimed by either camp to remain coherent. Natural formation explains its material reality. Human perception explains the discomfort it produces. Both can be true without conflict. As waves continue to pass overhead and sediment drifts slowly across ledges, the stone remains patient. It does not hurry to satisfy inquiry. It does not lean toward legend or retreat into denial. It occupies the space between explanation and acceptance with confidence. That space, unsettling at first, becomes restful when allowed to remain open. In that openness, Yonaguni continues to hold its shape, indifferent to the need for final answers, secure in the patience of geology. When human hands are suggested but not confirmed, some researchers pause here not because the formation demands excitement, but because it quietly invites hesitation. From certain angles, the stone appears organized. Step-like shapes descend with an order that feels familiar. Right angles intersect where curves might be expected. Platforms seem to stack with an intention that resembles planning. Nothing shouts construction, but nothing entirely dismisses it either. The shapes sit in that uncomfortable middle space where suggestion begins, but certainty refuses to arrive. And that is precisely where attention lingers longest at night. Those inclined toward human involvement point gently, not triumphantly. They gesture toward what appears to be stairs, carved in sequences that feel too patient to be accidental. They note flat surfaces that resemble terraces, edges that meet with a regularity that feels rehearsed. The language used is careful. It sounds like resemblance rather than declaration. Words like appears, suggests, resembles do most of the work. No one here is shouting proof. They are whispering possibility, which is far more unsettling. Others respond with equal calm. Nature, they remind us, has had more time than humans ever allow themselves. Given enough pressure, water, tectonic movement, and erosion, stone fractures along planes that mimic intention. Rock splits cleanly when stress finds predictable paths. Layers shear away in steps. Corners form, not because someone measured them, but because physics prefers efficiency. Nature, when left alone long enough, becomes very good at imitation, and it does so without caring whether the result looks designed. No tools have been recovered. This detail returns repeatedly like a quiet refrain. No chisels, no fragments, no marks that can be traced convincingly to deliberate shaping. No artifacts rest nearby to anchor the site within a cultural system. There are no broken vessels, no remnants of habitation, no debris that usually follows humans wherever they linger. The stone stands alone, unaccompanied, which complicates any story that wants people too close to it. No settlements connect clearly on land. There are no roads leading toward it. No inland structures align with it convincingly. Nothing on shore seems eager to claim responsibility. The surrounding landscape offers no narrative support. If humans were involved, they arrived lightly and left nothing behind, which is not how humans usually behave for long. Absence becomes part of the argument, not as proof, but as resistance. Yonaguni offers suggestion without commitment. That is its most consistent trait. It does not confirm human hands, but it does not fully dismiss them either. It allows both interpretations to stand, facing each other quietly, neither escalating. This neutrality is frustrating for anyone seeking resolution, but deeply satisfying for late-night history, which prefers questions that do not rush toward closure. There is faint humor in how uncomfortable this makes us. We want lines to choose sides. We want stone to confess. Either admit geology or declare architecture. Yonaguni refuses both roles. It behaves like a shape that does not care how it is categorized, which is perhaps the most unsettling option of all. We are left negotiating with our own expectations rather than with evidence that resolves anything. The step-like formations do not insist on being stairs. They do not guide the body upward with invitation. They simply exist at intervals that happen to match what feet recognize. Platforms do not demand gathering. They do not frame ceremony. They remain flat and silent, usable only in theory. Everything feels almost useful, but not quite committed enough to justify that usefulness. The space does not welcome occupation. It tolerates observation. Late at night, when certainty feels less necessary, this ambiguity becomes easier to sit with. The mind slows. The urge to solve relaxes. Yonaguni stops feeling like a puzzle and starts feeling like a condition, one where human pattern recognition brushes up against geological patience. We see what we are trained to see. Nature provides the raw material generously. Nature also has a long history of misleading us gently. Coastlines look intentional, columns resemble temples, arches form without ceremony. Basalt stacks itself into shapes that feel architectural. We do not accuse nature of deception. We accuse ourselves of wanting answers too quickly. Yonaguni participates in that tradition quietly, offering forms that cooperate with imagination without endorsing it. There is no urgency in the stone, no message embedded within it. It does not try to persuade. It does not defend itself against interpretation. It remains indifferent to being called natural or artificial. That indifference is what allows debates to continue without resolution. The site does not deteriorate under disagreement. It remains exactly as it is, while explanations rotate around it. Some nights, the absence of tools feels decisive. Other nights, it feels incomplete. The lack of artifacts could mean no humans were present, or it could mean they were careful, brief, or erased by time. Both interpretations require assumptions. Neither closes the case. Yonaguni resists becoming evidence. It prefers being observed. What remains most consistent is restraint. Claims rarely escalate beyond suggestion. Counterclaims rarely dismiss curiosity entirely. The conversation stays suspended, held in balance by the stone itself. This is not how modern discourse prefers to behave. We like conclusions. Yonaguni offers continuation instead. And so the formations remain step-like but not steps, platform-like but not platforms, angled but not announced. Human hands are suggested but never confirmed. Nature is credited but never fully satisfies curiosity. The site rests in that narrow space between explanation and refusal, where history feels calm, slightly amused, and entirely uninterested in being resolved tonight. The problem with wanting an answer too quickly. Modern curiosity prefers resolution, preferably delivered cleanly, confidently, and before patience has time to complicate things. We are trained to sort phenomena into categories as quickly as possible, not because the categories are always accurate, but because they are comforting, either natural or artificial, either miracle or erosion, either intention or accident. This habit works well on land where objects sit still, light behaves predictably, and context remains politely in place. Underwater, those expectations lose their authority almost immediately. Yonaguni does not cooperate with this desire for fast clarity. It does not lean clearly toward explanation, and it does not reward certainty with confirmation. The structure remains shaped enough to provoke curiosity and incomplete enough to resist ownership by any single theory. It looks organized, but not organized enough. It feels deliberate, but not deliberate enough. It invites attention without granting permission to conclude, which is an uncomfortable position for a modern mind trained to finish what it starts. The problem is not that Yonaguni is confusing. The problem is that we want it to stop being confusing on our schedule. We expect answers to arrive at the pace of headlines, documentaries, and neatly edited conclusions. The site refuses that tempo. It asks for something slower, something closer to observation than explanation. That request is often interpreted as evasive, when in reality it is simply incompatible with urgency. The sea keeps context fragmented. This is not poetic language, it is a physical condition. Water moves, sediment shifts, visibility changes daily. What looks like a sharp edge one morning dissolves into shadow by afternoon. Currents erase clarity and then restore it differently the next day. Perspective is never stable for long enough to build confidence. Even the most careful documentation must accept that what is seen today may not be visible tomorrow in the same way. Light underwater is unreliable. It bends. It scatters. It exaggerates angles and softens others. Lines appear straighter or more irregular, depending on the sun's position, the depth, and the clarity of the water. What looks architectural in one frame looks geological in another. The sea does not offer a neutral viewing platform. It edits constantly without asking permission, and that makes certainty difficult to maintain. Modern curiosity struggles with environments that do not hold still. We prefer sites that can be walked, measured, fenced, and photographed repeatedly under identical conditions. Yonaguni cannot be pinned down that way. Each dive is a negotiation. Each observation is partial. Each return visit alters understanding rather than refining it neatly. The site resists accumulation of certainty, which makes it feel slippery, even though the stone itself is not moving at all. There is mild irony in how often frustration is framed as mystery. When answers do not arrive quickly, we assume something is being hidden. We look for intention behind ambiguity. In truth, much of Yonaguni's resistance comes from the environment rather than the structure. The sea fragments context naturally. It interrupts continuity. It prevents the kind of comprehensive overview that encourages confidence. Certainty moves slowly underwater. This is not a metaphor. It is a practical reality. Tools behave differently. Measurements are harder to repeat. Documentation requires patience that does not translate well into dramatic narratives. Underwater archaeology is, by necessity, an exercise in restraint. Conclusions must be provisional. Statements must remain soft. The sea punishes haste by distorting results. And yet, modern curiosity often treats hesitation as weakness. If an answer cannot be delivered clearly, it is dismissed or sensationalized. Yonaguni has experienced both. Some declare it artificial, with certainty that exceeds the evidence. Others declare it purely natural, with equal confidence. Both positions offer relief from ambiguity, and both may be premature. Yonaguni does not reward those who rush to claim it. It remains indifferent to interpretation. It does not respond to confidence. It does not clarify itself when challenged. It simply continues to exist in conditions that undermine fast thinking. This can feel frustrating, especially for audiences accustomed to closure. But frustration is not evidence of mystery. It is evidence of impatience. Late-night history finds comfort here. When urgency relaxes, the need to decide fades. Yonaguni becomes less of a problem to solve and more of a space to observe. The question shifts from "what is it?" to "why do we need to know so quickly?" That shift changes the entire experience. The site stops being an argument and starts being a reminder of how much context matters. Wanting an answer too quickly often leads to overstatement. Claims harden before evidence does. Language escalates to fill gaps left by incomplete data. Yonaguni has been called a monument, a ruin, a temple, a natural formation, sometimes all within the same conversation. Each label carries assumptions that the site itself has not confirmed. The labels say more about the speaker than the stone. The sea encourages humility. It does not allow prolonged certainty. Divers learn quickly that confidence must remain flexible. Conditions change, equipment fails, plans adapt. Underwater control is always partial. Yonaguni exists entirely within that framework, which makes it a poor candidate for definitive answers delivered on land-based timelines. Perspective shifts with current and light, but also with expectation. A viewer looking for architecture will find it more easily. A viewer trained in geology will recognize familiar fracture patterns. Neither is necessarily wrong. Both are incomplete. The site does not resolve the tension between them because it does not need to. The tension exists in interpretation, not in the stone. There is a quiet humor in how seriously we take our own urgency. The stone has been there for millennia. It is not waiting for us to decide what it is. It does not benefit from resolution. It does not deteriorate faster because we are impatient. The pressure to conclude exists entirely on the surface, far above the site itself. Modern curiosity prefers answers that can be summarized. Yonaguni resists summarization. Any attempt to compress it into a single explanation strips away the conditions that make it what it is. The site is inseparable from the sea, from shifting light, from partial visibility. Remove those elements and certainty becomes easier, but accuracy does not. The problem, then, is not Yonaguni. The problem is our relationship with uncertainty. We treat unanswered questions as failures rather than as invitations to slow down. We equate hesitation with ignorance. Underwater, hesitation is often the most responsible position available. Certainty moves slowly underwater because water enforces humility. It demands repetition. It punishes assumption. It fragments context and refuses to reassemble it neatly. Yonaguni exists entirely within that discipline. It asks us to adapt rather than to conquer. When viewed through this lens, the lack of a clear answer stops feeling like a deficiency. It starts to feel appropriate. The site is shaped enough to provoke curiosity and incomplete enough to resist ownership. It remains available without being possessible. That balance is rare, and it is easily disrupted by impatience. Late at night, when the urge to conclude loosens, Yonaguni feels less frustrating. It becomes a lesson in tempo rather than in origin. The sea continues to shift. Light continues to bend. Visibility continues to change. Certainty continues to move slowly, as it always has underwater. And perhaps that is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted quietly, without rushing it toward an answer it was never designed to provide. Time that moves differently below the surface. Time behaves differently below the surface, and this is not a poetic statement so much as a practical one. Water alters scale. It slows movement, distorts distance, and interrupts the usual signals we rely on to measure duration. Minutes stretch. Orientation loosens. Cause and effect feel less immediate. When history is submerged, it stops aligning neatly with the timelines we prefer on land, and Yonaguni exists entirely within that altered rhythm, calm enough to remain unresolved without apology. Sea levels changed dramatically after the last ice age. This is one of the least controversial facts involved in the discussion, which is perhaps why it is often rushed past. Vast areas that are now underwater were once dry ground. Coastlines shifted. Plains disappeared. Hills became reefs. What feels ancient and remote beneath the sea was, at one point, simply landscape. This does not create mystery on its own, it creates context. And context has a habit of complicating answers rather than delivering them. Human migration along coastlines predates written memory. People moved where resources were predictable, and coastlines offered food, navigation, and continuity. This is not speculation. It is supported quietly by archaeology scattered across continents. Shell middens, tools, campsites, and pathways appear again and again near ancient shores. These movements happened long before anyone felt the need to document them formally. Memory carried them briefly. Then memory moved on. None of this proves construction at Yonaguni. That distinction matters. Expanding possibility is not the same as claiming certainty. The presence of humans near ancient coastlines does not mean they shaped every stone they encountered. It only means that absence of proof is not the same as proof of absence. The timeline becomes wider, softer, and less eager to close itself. Below the surface, time compresses and expands unevenly. A formation can look freshly cut even after thousands of years because erosion behaves differently underwater. Sharp edges persist. Plains remain flat. Features that would soften quickly on land endure with surprising clarity. This does not imply intention. It simply removes one of the usual indicators we rely on to dismiss it. Age becomes harder to read. Certainty loosens its grip. Late-night history is comfortable here. It prefers spaces where conclusions feel premature and patience feels appropriate. Yonaguni does not demand a verdict. It allows multiple timelines to overlap without resolving their tension. Geological time and human time brush past one another, neither asserting dominance. The site rests in that overlap quietly, unbothered by debate. The end of the last ice age was not a single event. It unfolded unevenly across regions and centuries. Meltwater surged, coastlines redrew themselves repeatedly, communities adapted, retreated, migrated, or vanished. What survived was not always what was most significant, but what happened to sit in the right conditions. Preservation followed circumstance more often than intention. Underwater sites inherit this unevenness. They do not sit neatly within human chronologies. They are shaped by processes that do not care about cultural categories. Stone breaks along plains dictated by physics. Water sculpts according to current and chemistry. Time accumulates without regard for narrative. Yonaguni reflects this indifference clearly. When viewed through a modern lens, This can feel evasive. We want timelines to behave. We want before and after to remain distinct. Underwater, those boundaries blur. A structure can feel ancient and immediate at the same time. The past does not feel finished. It feels paused, which is more unsettling than disappearance. The idea that humans may have occupied areas now submerged does not introduce fantasy. It introduces humility. It reminds us that our maps are temporary and our records incomplete. Written memory covers only a thin slice of human experience. Before that, movement, settlement, and abandonment happened quietly, leaving traces that were never meant to be permanent. Yonaguni sits comfortably inside that uncertainty. It does not strain toward explanation. It does not collapse under speculation. It allows the possibility that multiple truths may coexist without forcing them into competition. That calm refusal to choose sides is rare and deeply uncomfortable for a culture that values decisive answers. There is subtle irony in how threatening uncertainty feels to us. We often claim to admire mystery, yet rush to eliminate it the moment it resists packaging. Yonaguni has been labeled repeatedly, often with great confidence, and then stripped of those labels just as quickly. The site remains unaffected by the cycle. Time below the surface does not hurry to clarify itself. Layers accumulate without announcement. Changes register slowly. 1,000 years can pass without leaving the kinds of marks we expect on land. This difference invites misinterpretation. We mistake preservation for youth. We confuse sharpness with recency. Underwater, those assumptions fail quietly. Late at night, when the need to explain softens, this failure becomes instructive. It reminds us that our tools for understanding are shaped by environment. What works above water does not translate cleanly below it. Yonaguni exposes that limitation gently, without confrontation. The widened possibility introduced by changing sea levels does not resolve the debate, it reframes it. The question shifts from "who built this?" to "what timelines are we ignoring?" That shift removes urgency. It replaces accusation with observation. The site becomes less of a puzzle and more of a reminder that history is not obligated to remain accessible. There is no urgency embedded in the stone, no signal that demands interpretation. Yonaguni does not attempt to communicate. It simply exists where time has placed it, under conditions that resist clarity. The discomfort arises not from danger or mystery, but from the realization that some answers require patience we are no longer practiced at offering. Human migration before written memory expands context without delivering conclusions. It invites care. It asks us to consider how much has been lost, submerged, or never recorded. It does not grant permission to invent, only to remain open. That openness is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it is discipline. The sea is an unreliable archivist. It preserves selectively and erases generously. It does not label its contents. It does not explain itself. Yonaguni exists entirely within that archive, shaped by forces that operate on scales uncomfortable for human storytelling, which is why late-night history prefers to rest here. Not because the site is mysterious, but because it is unfinished in a way that feels honest. It does not rush toward meaning. It does not resolve itself on demand. It allows time to move differently, and in doing so, it invites us to slow down with it. Uncertainty is not a flaw in this context. It is the condition. Yonaguni sits within it calmly, unaffected by impatience, indifferent to labels, and quietly aligned with a version of time that does not care whether we reach an answer tonight. Why the structure feels unsettling. Yonaguni unsettles not because it looks destroyed, but because it does not. That distinction matters more than it first appears. Ruins usually announce themselves clearly. They collapse, they fracture, they scatter debris in ways that feel final and emotionally legible. A ruin tells us a story we already understand. Something ended badly and time finished the work. Yonaguni does not offer that comfort. It does not look ruined. It looks unfinished. And unfinished things are far harder for the human mind to tolerate. The structure does not feel broken. It feels paused. Edges remain sharp enough to suggest continuity. Surfaces feel intentional enough to resist dismissal. Nothing screams catastrophe. Nothing signals abandonment through violence or decay. Instead, there is a sense that something simply stopped, mid-gesture, as if time stepped aside briefly and forgot to return. That absence of resolution is what creates unease, not fear, but a quieter, more persistent discomfort. Humans struggle with things that do not resolve. We are trained culturally and psychologically to look for conclusions. We prefer collapse to ambiguity because collapse confirms a narrative arc. Something was built, something failed, something remains. Ambiguity denies us that structure. It asks us to sit with a question that refuses to close itself and that requires patience rather than reaction. Patience is not a skill. Modern curiosity rewards generously. Yonaguni appears shaped enough to provoke recognition, yet incomplete enough to resist classification. It does not offer the visual cues we associate with disaster. There are no piles of rubble that reassure us something went wrong decisively. There is no dramatic fracture that signals the end of use. Instead, the form feels suspended, caught between intention and erosion, between process and outcome. This liminal state unsettles because it refuses to tell us whether we are arriving too late or too early. We are comfortable with ruins because they are emotionally legible. A ruin confirms impermanence. It reinforces what we already believe about time's authority. Yonaguni, by contrast, feels indifferent to time's usual performance. It does not dramatize loss. It does not mourn itself. It does not present decay as evidence of meaning. It simply remains intact enough to provoke questions and incomplete enough to refuse answers. This creates a subtle tension in the observer. We keep waiting for the structure to declare itself. Was it finished? Was it interrupted? Was it ever meant to be completed? Yonaguni offers no commentary. It does not defend its appearance. It does not apologize for its ambiguity. It remains silent, which forces the observer to supply narrative instead. That demand feels heavier than being told a story outright. Ambiguity suggests patience rather than drama. Drama arrives quickly and resolves loudly. Ambiguity lingers. It requires time to sit with it, time to notice small shifts in perception, time to accept that clarity may not arrive. Yonaguni asks for this slower engagement, and that request alone can feel unsettling in a culture trained to move on quickly when certainty stalls. The structure does not insist on belief, and it does not reward dismissal. It occupies a narrow middle ground that is difficult to maintain mentally. To believe fully would require evidence the site does not provide. To dismiss fully would require certainty that is equally unavailable. Yonaguni holds both impulses in suspension, refusing to collapse into either camp. That balance is fragile and uncomfortable. Late-night history recognizes this feeling well. In quieter hours, when urgency loosens and the need to decide softens, ambiguity becomes less threatening. The structure stops demanding answers and starts offering presence. Yonaguni does not ask to be solved. It asks to be observed slowly, without pressure to conclude. That shift changes everything. There is a faint irony in how unsettling stillness can be. Movement reassures us that something is happening. Collapse reassures us that something has happened. Stillness offers neither comfort. Yonaguni's surfaces do not show struggle, they show continuity. That continuity feels wrong to an eye trained to equate meaning with change. We often say that humans fear the unknown, but this is only partly true. What we truly fear is the unresolved. The unknown that promises future clarity is exciting. The unresolved that offers none feels oppressive. Yonaguni belongs to the second category. It does not feel like a mystery waiting to be solved. It feels like a condition that will remain, whether we understand it or not. The structure's apparent incompletion also resists ownership. A finished monument can be claimed. A ruin can be explained. An unfinished form remains open, and openness invites competing narratives without endorsing any of them. Yonaguni has been claimed and released repeatedly for this reason. Each explanation feels temporary. Each dismissal, incomplete. There is mild humor in how much effort we expend trying to force resolution onto a site that refuses it so calmly. We bring labels, measurements, comparisons, and analogies. The structure absorbs them without reaction. It neither confirms nor contradicts. It simply continues to exist underwater, under shifting light, under interpretation, unchanged by any of it. The feeling of being paused rather than destroyed also disrupts our sense of historical progress. We prefer timelines that move forward cleanly. Something begins, something ends, something replaces it. Yonaguni interrupts that flow. It feels like a sentence stopped mid-word, not erased, not finished, just left hanging. Humans prefer collapse because collapse absolves us of patience. Once something is clearly broken, we can move on emotionally. Ambiguity keeps us engaged without rewarding that engagement. It demands restraint. Yonaguni offers no climax, no payoff, no final image. It remains in a holding pattern that mirrors the discomfort it creates. Late at night, this discomfort becomes quieter, easier to tolerate. The structure no longer feels threatening, it feels honest. Many things in history did not resolve cleanly. Many processes stopped without explanation. Yonaguni simply refuses to hide that reality behind drama or decay. The unsettling quality, then, does not come from danger or mystery, but from restraint. The structure refuses to collapse into a story that comforts us. It does not perform ruin. It does not perform intention. It performs nothing at all. That neutrality leaves the observer alone with their expectations. Yonaguni asks only to remain observed slowly. It does not require belief. It does not require dismissal. It does not demand interpretation. It allows time to pass differently around it, inviting patience without promising reward. For some, that feels unsettling. For late-night history, it feels appropriate. In the end, the structure feels unfinished rather than destroyed because it was never obligated to finish performing for us. It exists outside our need for resolution. It remains paused, not waiting, not failing, simply present. And that quiet refusal to resolve itself is what lingers longest, long after the urge to explain has finally grown tired. Media noise and the need for mystery. Once photographs spread, attention arrived loudly without waiting to learn how quietly the site had existed before being noticed. Images traveled faster than context ever could, moving across screens and pages, with the confidence that visibility alone was a form of understanding. The moment Yonaguni could be seen easily, it could also be imagined freely, and imagination rarely waits for permission. The sea had protected the formation for centuries by limiting access and fragmenting perspective. Photography removed that barrier in an instant. Ancient cities were declared almost immediately, not because evidence demanded it, but because narrative prefers scale. A city sounds more satisfying than a formation. It implies intention, population, purpose, and loss. It carries emotional weight. A formation, by contrast, sounds unfinished, temporary, and ambiguous. Media does not reward ambiguity well. It rewards stories that feel complete even when they are not. Lost civilizations followed closely behind. The idea slipped in easily, almost politely, because it filled gaps without asking too many questions. If something looks old and structured and underwater, then surely it must belong to a forgotten people. The logic feels intuitive, even comforting. It transforms uncertainty into romance. It replaces patience with wonder, and it moves far more quickly than sediment ever could. These narratives traveled faster than evidence because they were lighter. Evidence requires method, repetition, and restraint. Narratives require only attention. A photograph freezes a moment and presents it as truth, even though underwater reality is defined by motion, distortion, and partial visibility. Still, images flatten complexity, and once flattened, complexity becomes easier to label. Media noise thrives on this flattening. It amplifies edges, exaggerates angles, and isolates features that feel deliberate while ignoring surrounding context that complicates interpretation. Yonaguni's steps became stairs. Its plains became plazas. Its fractures became walls. Each transformation felt reasonable in isolation, and together they formed a story that sounded complete enough to repeat. The formation itself did not change. The stone remained exactly where it had been. The sea continued to move, as it always had. Light still shifted. Visibility still varied. What changed was the atmosphere around the site. Silence was replaced by speculation. Observation was replaced by declaration. The slow pace of underwater study was overwhelmed by the speed of modern storytelling. There is mild irony in how quickly mystery was imposed. The site had existed comfortably within uncertainty for a long time. It did not require mystery to remain interesting. Mystery was added because interest alone did not feel sufficient. Modern audiences are trained to expect revelation, not restraint. When restraint persists, it is often reframed as secrecy. Media does not invent mystery maliciously. It responds to demand. Mystery holds attention. It offers endless continuation. Answers end conversations. Questions sustain them. By declaring Yonaguni a lost city, discussion could continue indefinitely without the burden of proof. Each new article, documentary, or video could revisit the same images with renewed excitement. Because mystery moves faster than sediment, it outran the slower processes of study. Sediment accumulates quietly, layer by layer, without urgency. Media cycles demand constant motion. They prefer escalation. Each retelling of Yonaguni's story became slightly more confident, slightly more dramatic, slightly further removed from the cautious language of researchers. The need for mystery reveals more about the audience than the site. We are uncomfortable with things that remain unresolved. We want history to feel active, dramatic, and emotionally charged. A formation that simply exists underwater without explanation feels unsatisfying. Mystery restores energy. It turns stillness into suspense. Late-night history notices how this energy feels different. It is louder, it is sharper, it does not invite rest. Media noise fills silence rather than listening to it. Yonaguni's original quiet becomes difficult to recover once noise takes over. Even attempts at correction often adopt the same dramatic tone they seek to counter. There is also a subtle shift in authority. Once media narratives take hold, evidence is expected to conform to story rather than the other way around. Researchers become characters. Skepticism becomes opposition. Patience becomes hesitation. The formation becomes a stage rather than a subject. The formation did not ask for this transformation. It did not benefit from it. It did not resist it either. Stone does not argue. It allows stories to pass over it without reaction. Yonaguni absorbed media attention the same way it absorbed centuries of water pressure without visible response. Over time, repetition hardened speculation into assumption. What began as possibility was repeated as likelihood. What was once framed as question was retold as implication. Media rarely announces when it crosses these thresholds. The shift happens quietly until the original uncertainty is barely remembered. There is something faintly amusing about how confidently mystery is marketed. The unknown is presented as though it were a discovery in itself. Titles promise revelation while delivering familiarity. The same photographs reappear, accompanied by the same claims, repackaged for new audiences. The formation remains unchanged, patient, and uninterested. Media noise also narrows focus. It selects the most visually compelling angles and ignores others. Complexity is edited out. Context is trimmed. What remains feels clearer, but is often less accurate. Yonaguni's relationship with its environment becomes secondary to its usefulness as an image. The need for mystery is not inherently wrong. It reflects curiosity. But when mystery replaces observation, it becomes noise. Noise drowns out subtlety. It overwhelms slow thinking. It pressures conclusions that the site itself does not support. Late at night, when noise fades, Yonaguni feels different again. Without headlines, without dramatic narration, the formation returns to being what it has always been: stone shaped by time, water, and pressure, observed imperfectly, and interpreted cautiously. Mystery loosens its grip. Patience returns. The formation did not change, only the story surrounding it did. That distinction matters. It reminds us that meaning is often layered externally rather than discovered internally. Yonaguni remains where it is, unaffected by attention, while narratives rise and fall above it like waves. Media noise will continue to move quickly. Sediment will continue to move slowly. The two operate on different scales and answer to different needs. Late-night history prefers the slower one. It listens for what remains when noise passes. And in Yonaguni's case, what remains is not a city or a secret, but a quiet reminder that mystery is often something we add, not something that was ever required. What science can say without promising comfort. Most geologists conclude that Yonaguni is a natural formation shaped slowly and persistently by tectonic stress, fracturing along predictable planes, and erosion acting patiently over long spans of time. This conclusion is not dramatic, and it is not meant to be. It arrives through accumulation rather than revelation, through comparison rather than excitement, and through a willingness to accept explanations that do not feel emotionally satisfying. Science, in this case, does not offer a story that comforts curiosity. It offers one that stabilizes it. Tectonic stress explains the straight fractures without requiring intention. Rock under pressure breaks where it is weakest, and weakness often follows orderly patterns. Layered sandstone, in particular, separates cleanly, producing flat plains, right angles, and step-like features that appear deliberate even when they are not. Erosion then refines these shapes, removing softer material and leaving behind surfaces that feel intentional simply because they are efficient. Water does not carve randomly. It follows paths of least resistance with impressive consistency. From this perspective, Yonaguni becomes less mysterious and more instructive. It demonstrates how easily geological processes can resemble design when given enough time. Time, after all, is geology's primary tool, and it is one humans tend to underestimate. We imagine erosion as softening and rounding, forgetting that it can also sharpen and define under the right conditions. Science reminds us of this gently, without insisting that the reminder feels satisfying. Some researchers remain cautious, not because they reject geological explanations, but because they respect the limits of observation. Underwater environments complicate certainty. Visibility shifts. Context is incomplete. Data arrives unevenly. Caution here is not indecision. It is discipline. It acknowledges that conclusions are strongest when they remain proportionate to evidence. This restraint often reads as hesitation to those seeking resolution, but it is one of science's more reliable virtues. Others remain unconvinced, not necessarily because they possess stronger evidence, but because uncertainty leaves room for alternative narratives. Science does not eliminate doubt entirely. It narrows it. That narrowing can feel unsatisfying when what remains is still ambiguous. The gap between likely natural and absolutely proven is small scientifically but psychologically significant. People tend to inhabit that gap comfortably when it suits imagination. The structure itself survives debate without needing to respond. This is perhaps the most unsettling part. Yonaguni does not adjust its shape in response to new papers. It does not sharpen its edges to clarify arguments. It does not soften under criticism. It remains unchanged, while interpretations circulate around it. The stone offers no commentary on who is closer to being right. Stone does not participate in conferences. It does not attend symposiums or submit to peer review. It does not clarify itself when misrepresented. It allows humans to argue in its presence without intervening. This indifference is often mistaken for mystery, but it is simply material consistency. The stone behaves exactly as stone behaves, regardless of what is said about it. Science, at its most honest, does not promise comfort. It promises coherence. It aligns observations with known processes and accepts that some outcomes feel anticlimactic. Declaring Yonaguni natural does not diminish its significance. It relocates that significance from human intention to geological patience. The wonder shifts quietly from who built this to how long it took to become what it is. This shift is difficult for audiences conditioned to equate importance with human involvement. A structure feels more meaningful if someone meant it. Science resists that bias. It does not assign value based on intention. It describes processes whether or not they flatter human centrality. Yonaguni, under scientific explanation, becomes a testament to forces that operate without awareness or ambition. There is mild irony in how unsatisfying this can feel. People often claim to trust science but prefer it when it delivers exciting conclusions. When it offers restraint, patience, and probability instead, disappointment follows. Science, however, does not adjust its conclusions to preserve wonder. It allows wonder to relocate. Late-night history listens carefully to this tone. It notices that scientific language is deliberately calm, deliberately careful. Words like likely, consistent with, and best explained by appear often. These phrases are not evasive. They are precise. They reflect a commitment to accuracy over persuasion. Comfort is not part of the mandate. The presence of dissent does not invalidate the consensus. It simply reflects the diversity of questions being asked. Some questions focus on origin, others focus on process. Science addresses the latter more comfortably than the former. It explains how something could form without explaining why humans wish it were otherwise. Yonaguni survives this tension intact. It is not weakened by explanation. It is not strengthened by mystery. It remains what it has always been, a formation shaped by forces larger and slower than narrative. Debate flows around it like water, leaving no mark. What science can say is often quieter than what imagination prefers. It can say that similar formations exist elsewhere, on land and underwater, shaped by comparable stresses. It can say that no definitive evidence of construction has been found. It can say that geological processes are sufficient to explain the observed features. It can also say that absolute certainty is rare in complex natural systems. What science does not say is equally important. It does not say the debate is exciting. It does not say the answer should satisfy curiosity. It does not say mystery is required. It accepts that some formations will always feel suggestive because human perception is tuned to pattern recognition. Stone does not correct us when we project meaning onto it. It allows projection to pass. Science, meanwhile, attempts to reduce projection without erasing curiosity entirely. It offers a framework rather than a finale. Late at night, this framework feels appropriate. It does not rush, it does not dramatize. It allows the mind to rest without insisting on belief or dismissal. Yonaguni becomes an example of how science operates best when it resists spectacle. The structure remains, the explanations evolve slowly, conferences conclude, papers are archived, new data appears, old debates resurface. Through all of it, The stone stays silent, unaffected by consensus or dissent. In the end, what science can say without promising comfort is enough. Yonaguni is most likely natural, shaped by stress, fracture, and erosion over immense time. Some questions remain open. Some imaginations remain unconvinced. The structure survives all of it without needing to respond. Stone does not participate in conferences. It does not require agreement. It does not seek closure. It exists. Science describes. Comfort is optional. Why Yonaguni does not need to be a city. Yonaguni does not need streets to be impressive, and the longer one remains with that idea, the more obvious it becomes. Streets imply movement, commerce, routine, and the quiet insistence that people once needed to get somewhere else. They suggest purpose defined by use. Yonaguni offers none of that, and yet it holds attention with remarkable persistence. Its surfaces do not guide traffic. Its edges do not invite crowds. It does not imagine daily life unfolding across it. It remains compelling without asking to be inhabited, which is already an unusual achievement. It does not need inhabitants to matter. We are accustomed to measuring significance through presence. People validate places. Ruins feel important because someone lived there, suffered there, or left something behind. Yonaguni bypasses this logic entirely. It offers no footprints, no tools, no domestic residue to anchor narrative. In doing so, it quietly challenges the assumption that meaning requires human occupation. The stone stands without testimony, and still it remains difficult to ignore. It does not need a name older than the sea. Names comfort us. They allow classification. They let us file things away neatly, giving the illusion that once something is named, it is understood. Yonaguni has accumulated names eagerly assigned from above water, but none of them settle comfortably. Each label feels provisional. The structure does not respond when called a monument or dismissed as rock. It does not correct pronunciation. It does not confirm lineage. It remains indifferent to naming, which weakens the power names usually carry. Its value lies elsewhere, in a quieter and more unsettling place. Yonaguni exposes human discomfort with incomplete answers. It does so gently, without accusation. It simply refuses to resolve itself quickly enough to satisfy modern curiosity. The longer one looks, the clearer it becomes that the unease does not come from danger or mystery, but from the absence of closure. We are uncomfortable not because Yonaguni is threatening, but because it will not finish the sentence we keep trying to write for it. The structure shows how easily shape invites story. Straight lines whisper intention. Flat planes suggest design. Steps imply ascent. Our minds complete patterns before evidence has time to intervene. This is not a flaw. It is how human perception works. Yonaguni does not exploit this tendency maliciously. It merely exists in a form that triggers it. The stories arise not from the stone, but from the observer. And once story begins, it moves quickly. Cities emerge fully imagined. Populations appear. Civilizations rise and fall in the space between two photographs. The formation becomes a stage rather than a subject. Yonaguni does nothing to encourage this, yet it does nothing to stop it either. Stone does not interrupt imagination. It allows it to pass freely, even when imagination runs ahead of restraint. What Yonaguni also reveals patiently is how slowly truth reveals itself underwater, not because truth is hidden, but because conditions do not favor speed. Light shifts, Visibility fluctuates, perspective distorts, context arrives in fragments. Underwater environments resist the kind of comprehensive overview that encourages confidence. Each observation is partial. Each return visit alters perception rather than confirming it. Truth here is accumulative, not declarative. Late-night history is comfortable with this pace. It does not demand that Yonaguni become something more dramatic than it already is. It does not require the site to justify attention by claiming urban scale or human authorship. The formation is allowed to remain what it is, shaped, suggestive, unresolved. That permission is rare, and it changes the tone of observation entirely. Yonaguni does not need streets because it is not asking to be navigated. It does not need buildings because it is not asking to be occupied. It does not need people because it is not asking to be remembered. These absences do not diminish it. They free it from expectations that would otherwise narrow interpretation. A city demands explanation. A formation allows patience. There is subtle irony in how desperately we want Yonaguni to be something more than stone, as if stone alone were insufficient, as if geology could not be impressive without mythology layered on top. This impulse reveals a discomfort with impersonal processes. We prefer stories where someone intended something because intention feels relatable. Yonaguni suggests that intention may not be necessary for significance and that suggestion unsettles us. If Yonaguni were conclusively identified as a city, the conversation would change immediately. The site would become finite. Research would focus on who built it, when, and why. Questions would narrow. Mystery would collapse into history. That outcome might feel satisfying, but it would also close the space Yonaguni currently occupies, the space where observation is ongoing and interpretation remains provisional. By not being a city, Yonaguni remains open. It continues to function as a mirror for how we approach the unknown. Some approach with wonder, others with skepticism, some with urgency, others with restraint. The site accommodates all of these responses without privileging any of them. It does not reward belief or dismissal. It simply persists. This persistence is often mistaken for mystery. In reality, it is neutrality. Yonaguni does not perform secrecy. It does not guard answers. It does not hint deliberately. It remains available, yet incomplete. That incompleteness is not a puzzle to be solved, but a condition to be accepted. Acceptance, however, is far less exciting than revelation. And yet there is a quiet satisfaction in letting the structure remain unresolved. Without the pressure to label it a city, Yonaguni becomes an exercise in observing without concluding. It teaches patience indirectly. It slows interpretation by resisting it. It reminds us that not everything of value arrives with explanation attached. The need to elevate Yonaguni into a city often comes from a desire to legitimize attention. Cities feel important. They justify study. They attract funding and fascination. A formation feels modest by comparison. But modesty here is deceptive. Yonaguni's impact lies precisely in its refusal to scale up into something recognizable. It remains just unfamiliar enough to keep certainty at bay. There is also something restful about this refusal. Once the demand for answers softens, the structure feels less confrontational. It no longer asks to be defended or debunked. It simply exists within the sea, shaped by forces that do not care whether humans are impressed. That indifference can feel unsettling at first, then strangely calming. Yonaguni does not need to be a city because its significance does not depend on human centrality. It reveals how quickly we assign meaning based on pattern, how impatient we become when certainty delays, and how uncomfortable we are with conclusions that remain provisional. These insights are not delivered through instruction, but through presence. Underwater, truth does not announce itself. It accumulates slowly, often unevenly, sometimes inconclusively. Yonaguni embodies that reality perfectly. It sits at the intersection of geology, perception, and expectation without choosing sides. It does not resolve the debate. It sustains it quietly. In the end, Yonaguni's value lies not in what it might have been, but in what it continues to do. It exposes the tension between shape and story, between patience and urgency, between observation and imagination. It shows how easily we project and how slowly certainty arrives when conditions resist it. Yonaguni does not need streets, inhabitants, or an ancient name carved into certainty. It needs only to remain where it is, underwater, shaped enough to provoke, incomplete enough to resist ownership. Late-night history prefers it this way: unfinished, unclaimed, calm, waiting not for answers, but for observers willing to slow down long enough to stop demanding them. A form that remains without explanation. Tonight, Yonaguni remains where it has always been, not waiting, not hiding, not asking to be finished. It rests under pressure, under motion, under the slow insistence of water that never pauses long enough to form an opinion. It also rests under argument, which moves faster and leaves fewer marks. None of these conditions trouble it. The structure does not confirm what we hope. It does not deny what we suspect. It does not clarify itself when language grows impatient. It simply remains, shaped enough to be noticed and incomplete enough to stay unresolved, which is not a failure, but a state it has occupied comfortably for longer than memory can hold. Stone holds shape. Water holds silence. Time continues without concern for resolution or audience. These are not poetic gestures, but working conditions. The stone does not adjust when theories change. The water does not part to improve visibility. Time does not slow when debate intensifies. Together, they maintain an environment where explanation is optional rather than required. Yonaguni exists inside this arrangement calmly, without urgency, without escalation, without interest in whether it is believed or dismissed. It does not compete for attention. It does not reward certainty. It allows observation to happen at whatever pace patience permits. There is something faintly ironic in how unsettling that can feel. We are accustomed to endings that tell us when to stop thinking, conclusions that reassure us our effort was productive. Yonaguni offers none of that comfort. It does not summarize its meaning. It does not resolve itself neatly. It simply stops inviting interpretation when interpretation grows loud, reminding us that not every form exists to be understood fully. The discomfort arises not from mystery but from restraint. The structure refuses to perform certainty, and that refusal exposes how dependent we are on answers that arrive on demand. If sleep arrives the same way, quietly, without resolution, without conclusion, that feels appropriate. Sleep does not explain itself either. It does not negotiate. It does not announce its arrival. It comes when resistance fades and leaves, when conditions shift. Yonaguni has been practicing that patience for thousands of years, resting under movement, pressure, and speculation without changing its behavior. It does not mind if you borrow that patience for the night. It does not expect it back. It will remain exactly where it is, holding shape, holding silence, allowing time to continue unconcerned, long after explanation has finally grown tired.